Welcome everyone to the third webinar being offered by the Birds Caribbean Seabird Working Group in 2022. You may know, if you were able to attend previous webinars, that the Seabird Working Group is gearing up for a region-wide seabird count. We hope to launch a census in 2023 and have as many partners as possible get out and count as many seabirds as possible. So we're very excited about that. And this series of webinars is to help people get ready for that experience. We're starting with the simplest of topics. Identification was the subject of our first webinar. Our second webinar had to do with preparing and planning for a survey. And both of these webinars are available on Birds Caribbean's YouTube channel. And today we're going to do a third webinar where we delve down into the field methods needed for seabird surveys. Again, this is being recorded for presentation on Facebook and for other archiving, so be aware that you are being recorded. And to get us started, I want to introduce our speaker, Natalia Collier. And Natalia is probably familiar to a lot of you. She was the co-founder of EPIC, Environmental Protection in the Caribbean, a nonprofit that has a regional scope. They're based in the US and St. Martin. And she is a project manager after serving for over 20 years as the executive director. And she's worked on all sorts of different projects having to do with seabirds and other birds on topics such as citizen science, anti-poaching, population censuses, nest monitoring, and she was one of the co-authors on the first ever seabird breeding inventory for the Lesser Antilles. So one of the really important baseline books for what's going on in seabirds in that part of the Caribbean. So Natalia will be presenting for about an hour today. During the presentation, there'll be some fun quizzes. We hope you'll participate. If you have any questions or burning concerns, hopefully we'll get this chat opened up and you can place them there. And we also, if you're having trouble with chat, we can't get that open, you can use the Q&A. I also wanted to note that in addition to Natalia on the call today, we have Hannah Madden, Ann Sutton, and we are expecting Rhiannon Austin. And all three of those individuals can supplement Natalia's knowledge because of their seabird experiences in the region. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Natalia, and we'll get our presentation started. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hello, everybody. I'm going to try and talk kind of loud. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I have a fan on my computer and I haven't figured out how to turn it off. So, okay. So field methods for seabird surveys is the topic today. As Jen mentioned, my name is Natalia, and this is a joint effort between Birds Caribbean and EPIC. We also have support from Car Spa Rack. And this is an effort to do the 2023 seabird census in the Caribbean. So as Jen mentioned, we've got a series of webinars, and we look forward to doing more in the future as well. As mentioned, with EPIC, and our goal is to protect the Caribbean environment through research and community-based action. We have the Seabird Breeding Atlas of the Lesser Antilles, Grenadian Seabird Conservation Management Plan, and have also been involved in the Black-Cap Petrel Conservation Plan, among other activities. The Caribbean Seabird Census, if you haven't heard about it already, is a joint initiative for 2023. And as you all probably know, seabird populations are declining, and we want to support conservation by understanding the status of Caribbean seabirds, their habitats, and threats they're facing. So our goal is to count seabirds at as many Caribbean colonies as possible in 2023. And to do that, we need you. We need anyone who's interested, really. And that's why we're providing this sort of background information. So you could be a seabird expert, you could be a scientist from outside the region, You could be a volunteer, a citizen scientist. We will definitely find some way to get you involved. So thank you for being here. We want to provide these webinars also as a tool for having standardized methods throughout the region so we can compare them and have a great baseline to compare with future surveys as well. The previous webinars, as mentioned, were about seabird identification and basic concepts in seabird monitoring and census design. If you haven't seen these, I would strongly recommend checking those out also. They're available on Birds Caribbean's YouTube page, and they'll soon be available in Spanish and French as well. The other resources that are available include the Caribbean Seabirds Monitoring Manual, and that is available on the Birds Caribbean website. There's actually a seabird resources page, which the link is there. That's available in English, French, and Spanish. And a lot of the information in this is taken from that. There's also an inventory of breeding seabirds of the Caribbean, status and conservation of West Indian seabirds, and seabird identification cards, which are in English and Spanish. Other resources. So I mentioned the Seabird Atlas. That is on Amazon, digital or print. There's a Guide to the Birds of the West Indies by Raphael, a Seabirds of the World by Harrison, which has excellent drawings of all different angles, flying and sitting. There's also the Sibley Birds. The East version is used because it has, it's not as huge a complex of birds. You can more easily find the ones you're looking for. And it's also available as an app. So as I mentioned, the objective of this is to count as many seabirds as possible, count seabirds at as many Caribbean colonies as possible in 2023. And as Anne mentioned in her last talk about study design, you might have other objectives for specific surveys, like you might want to measure nesting success of a certain species, and that could be integrated into these census. We want to express that, of course, our first goal here is do no harm. Our ultimate hope is to conserve seabirds, and so we don't want to be causing the loss of nesting in the process. We want to make sure we still have good nesting success, even though we're out there counting. So adults often flush from nests when they see people walking around, which means they leave their eggs and chicks behind. And these eggs and small chicks have a hard time thermoregulating. So they're affected by cold, which isn't as much of a problem, but definitely heat is an issue in the Caribbean, and also predators. So we want to limit their exposure to about 10 minutes, which can sometimes limit your ability to do a full census, but move quickly through the colony, but also carefully, because as you can see, these eggs and chicks can be pretty cryptic and hard to find. Working at cooler times of day is important, and sometimes that means you have to leave at dark and then take your boat out and get there at dawn so that you have enough time in the cool hours to work. And avoid being out there when chicks are most mobile. So they're going to get to a point where they can run around and they'll actually do what's called creshing, and they'll come together in a group before they fledge for some species. And so that's kind of a dangerous time to be in the colony. The birds can kind of get lost or get entangled in things as they run away frantically. So that's something to be aware of. And in some places, it's so hard to say generally because each site's different, but in some places, frigate birds and pelican colonies are especially susceptible to disturbance. And so you want to proceed with caution and only if necessary, depending on the location. The other issue to consider is where. You can do the whole island, if it's a reasonable size. If it's an enormous island, maybe you just want to focus on where there are certain colonies of birds, like maybe a peninsula or a certain type of habitat. There might be little islands offshore or groups of cays, and you have to determine if you're going to include that in your survey area. maybe you're looking for certain species, which for the census, we're not. We're trying to get all the species present at a site, but you might have that consideration for a certain study you're doing. But regardless of what your site is, it's really important to mark the boundary with GPS, get the lat long of your survey points if you're observing from a distance, and that way it can be repeated, which is really important for future surveys. When is also a big consideration. Ideally, it's when most eggs have just hatched and before most chicks have fledged. And this also will vary based on the site and the species. So it's something you might just figure out over time. Once you do a few surveys, you understand when the peak is, and that's when you want to be out there. If it's too early in the season, there is a risk that birds will abandon the site if they see it as a threatening area. If they're, people walking around in the area they want to nest in. So that's something to think about if you're seeing like a lot of courtship and not a lot of nests. Maybe wait until you see that they're more settled and definitely going to be nesting there. So we have two groups, I guess we'd say, of seabirds. We have migratory species and resident species. The migratory species, again, it varies by site, but generally there's a peak of breeding during May through July. And this includes gulls, terns, and black and brown noddies. So the peak may vary based on where you are, but it would be sometime within this period. The other, as I mentioned, the other type that we categorize into is resident or year-round species. And again, it varies by site, and they tend to be, of course, as I said, year-round, but there are some peaks within that. So you could find these species at any time of year, possibly, but May through July, again, just like the migrants, but also December through March. So, doing more than one survey a year is often a good idea because you may not have your peak breeding for these species until, say, February, when there's no migrant species around at all. So something to keep in mind as you plan your surveys out. And we also have multiple types of surveys. The first is from a distance or remote. And this can mean viewing a site from another island, like in the top photo. You got really rough seas, maybe it's not a good day to be in a boat. Or there's, nearby land. So if maybe there's a cliff and you can see it from a peninsula nearby, or on a boat. Like the bottom picture, they have nice calm waters. It's a good day. They're on a sailboat. It's nice and stable. This is really good for difficult to access colonies, like on a cliff. Like in the bottom photo, you'd have a hard time hiking up that. So seeing it from a boat's a good option. It's often less accurate. You can see there's bushes in there. You're probably going to be missing nests. You're not going to see little eggs hidden underneath there. But it causes less disturbance at the same time. There's also colony surveys from within the colony. You can walk through the colony, count everything you see, and also mark nests as you go. If you plan to return, you can monitor nest productivity, see how the birds are doing, and also make sure that you've got every nest. So you might find new ones on subsequent visits. You get much better views to identify what birds are nesting there as you're closer. You can also check crevices, which you're not going to be able to see from the water or distance. So it's usually more accurate, but it also causes more disturbance. When you're going out in the field, something to consider is environmental factors. You're gonna want to record these in your notes anyway, but if there's really strong winds, maybe it's not a good day to be traveling out to these islands, especially because some places have rocky shorelines that you have to swim onto. Could be a rough landing. So you can use categories of wind, so you don't have to actually know how many kilometers per hour the wind is blowing. You can see that dust is being, lifted off the ground. So it'd be a force 4. And that allows you to not have to have technology with you to figure that out. The sea state is also, of course, important if you're going out, and it's something we record when doing surveys. For example, if you're doing a survey from a boat and there's 4-meter seas, you're probably not going to have very good observations. That's a way to understand, like, why are there suddenly twice as many birds the next week? Maybe it's because now the seas are calm. Environmental factors also include cloud cover, because that can change how well you can see. There might be more glare, more shadow. And so this is a way to break it up into 8s, from clear to cloudy. And also temperature. In this bottom photo, this bird isn't singing, it's actually hot. It's doing what's called gaping. And so that's something you want to be aware of when you're out there. If you're seeing a lot of birds being stressed by the heat, especially small chicks that normally would be protected by their parents, providing them shade, you want to make your way quickly through. You want to record what time of day it is, because that can really change which species you see, how many there are, and also your observation point, as I mentioned before. And we want to, I think most people prefer latitude, longitude. There's a lot of different ways to record GPS, but that's a pretty standardized, traditional way to do it. And although seabirds are great and we love them, we also care about other wildlife and plants. And so we want to record biodiversity. So if you see anything interesting, you're like, I've never seen that before. What is that? Take a picture, take notes, note where you saw it. And there's also great apps now to identify things like iNaturalist, Observato, and Seek. We also have lots of specialists who can help with ID, especially on the Birds Caribbean listservs. There's people who can answer your questions or at least direct you to someone who can. So there's possibility of endemics like this pink rhino iguana that the Laughing Gull's checking out. And so it could be some really exciting discovery. It could be something that hasn't been seen in a long time. So definitely keep an eye out for that. We also record threats. The goal of this ultimately is conservation, and that often means understanding what's impacting the birds we're seeing. So some of the threats you want to record are non-native mammals. You have rats, goats, cats, dogs, whatever it may be, and the type of evidence you saw. So scat, fur, tracks, could be a live or a dead animal. And if you are suspecting something but not quite sure, you can use UV light to see urine. You want to note where on the island it is and take photographs. Plenty of photos. You can never have too many photos. The only native mammals on most islands are bats. And so if you're seeing a mammal, it's probably not native. I guess it's a good rule of thumb. The detecting rats can be difficult. There's a few different methods you can use, and there's a lot of literature on this, but I'll just briefly introduce them in case it's something you want to look into more. There's chew blocks, like on the right. There's a little piece of plastic with a number on it, and you put something yummy in there, like peanut butter, coconut, and it's up on a flag. So a crab can't get to it, but a rat could, and then they'll chew on it, and you'll have that mark. There's also tracking tunnels, which is in that picture on the left. And that is something that also a rat could get into, but you can see the hermit crabs are on the outside. They haven't figured out how to get in. There's something yummy in there. Uh-oh, the screen just ended. Sorry. Okay, you guys are still seeing my screen? Okay. Sorry, I'm not seeing my view now. I don't know what happened there. Bear with me. Okay, back we go. All right, tracking tunnels. So there's something yummy in the middle of the tube, and you have ink pads and paper. So they walk over the ink pad and leave their footprint on the paper to get to the yummy treat, and then you can see their footprints. This is a little difficult to know exactly what you're seeing. We're not all great at identifying rat prints, but it's definitely something you can ask for help with if you're not sure. There's lots of experts out there that we can refer you to. Remote cameras we found to be the most effective. That's the picture on the bottom. You put it out at night and they're attracted to the bait and you can actually see the image of what you're having in that area. And we've also used traps. This is a more rudimentary but low cost option. It only works if it won't be reached by crabs. So for example, stringing it onto a tree trunk so a crab can't crawl up and get it. But you really want to be careful. You're not going to be impacting other native wildlife. You definitely don't want to be finding lizards in your traps and things like that. The other threat, which hopefully is not as pervasive anymore, but there is poaching still. This top photo is some fishermen pulling in a booby that they tried to catch, and also eggs. So you want to record what's being harvested, the amount of it, like a whole bucket, or how many carcasses you find, and also photograph if it's safe. Like this top photo, you wouldn't really want people to know that you're taking pictures of them doing something illegal, but if you can do it surreptitiously, go for it. And that's also the kind of thing that can be reported to the authorities, just so they're aware of the issue and maybe can even enforce it, which would be great. Plastic, as we all know, is a major problem. It can be found in nests and actually entangle chicks. It can be ingested. It can get wrapped up. Adults can get wrapped up in it as well. Fire is sometimes accidental, like people will have cook fires that get out of control, but there's also people that burn on purpose because they want to manage for seabird harvest. So it makes it easier to access nests if there's grasses rather than like big bushes and trees. So you want to take note of any burns, the size of the area that's burned, and any species you see that are impacted, like these tortoises that were found. So I mentioned before that it's important to do surveys at the peak period. And so there's various stages of nesting. We have pre-nesting, which is when they're just prospecting for nests. You don't see any eggs or chicks. And I mentioned this is a kind of sensitive time. You don't want to be causing disturbance during this period. There's also early laying. So there's a few eggs there, but not all the nests have eggs. Again, a little early for surveys. Peak laying is when most nests have eggs and there's some newly hatched chicks. This is a great time to be out there. You're going to get most of the birds that are nesting. There's also early hatching when most nests have small chicks, also a good time to survey. Pre-fledging, most nests have large chicks. Fledging is when chicks are ready to leave the nest. They're going to fly away. So that's really at the end of the season. It's not this simple, of course, in real life. Like you got multiple species on a site. They're all nesting at different periods. You got year-round nesters and migratory birds that are only there for a certain few months of the year. So you really need to do it based on what species you have at your site and figuring out when that peak's going to be. And even within species, like the year-round breeders, you won't necessarily have synchronous breeding. They might be there. There might be a peak in May and there might be another peak in January. So, again, it really depends on your site. You could simplify this into early peak and late chick rearing also, but you want to be there at the peak. So there's 4 types of surveys. These are outlined again in the manual, which I would encourage you all to download and look at. Today, we're just going to be covering the first 3. We're not going to go into productivity, which is nesting success. That's more of a long-term, throughout the season kind of monitoring. And that's definitely something we encourage, but not something we're expecting from this. So the first thing you're going to do is reconnaissance survey. So if you've never been to your site, you're going to go out there and just see where the birds are. What stage of nesting are they in? And get kind of a general idea of how many nesting pairs there are. This is going to be important because if you see 10,000 birds, it's going to change how you count versus if you see 25. And it's also that you can have different birds every year. Some birds don't have site fidelity. They don't care if they go back to the same nest site every year. And so you have to be aware of populations moving around and that you might need to survey some other nearby island to find the species you're looking for. So the first thing you want to do is literature search. Don't reinvent the wheel. Someone may have already gone to the site that you've been looking at going to, and you get some sense of what you might need to look for. Maybe there's a huge colony of tropic birds and you want to be there in the afternoon so you can see where their colony is. Maybe it's a year-round breeder and they found that they're mostly there in certain months. So that kind of information can be really helpful in designing when you want to go do your reconnaissance mission. So once you've done that, you can do a full population count, which is what our census is. And what we're trying to count is the number of active nests or nesting pairs. So we're not counting individual birds necessarily. That may be necessary in some situations, but our goal is to get the number of nests or nesting pairs. And you can also, if you're including mapping in this, the distribution of nests in the colony. So this works well in small to medium colonies, like less than 500 pairs. Or if you have enough surveyors, you could do a large colony, but you need to have a lot of people. And just note that there could be multiple levels of nesting. You might have a brown booby on top and a tropic bird underneath. Just being open to the possibility that there could be multiple levels of nesting happening, So we have different types of habitat. We're going to separate it here into 4 types. The first is low grass or bare ground, which is my favorite type to survey because you just walk around and look at what's there. It's super easy. And you can sometimes just count from a distance. You don't have to disturb the birds as much. You still would want to use binoculars. But for example, this least-turned nest on the left, it's pretty cryptic. You might have a hard time seeing that from far away. But then on the right, you have boobies and they're big and easy to spot. So it kind of depends on the species, what method you're going to use, as always. So some of the species you'll find in more open areas include many of our terns, as well as noddies, and the brown booby, masked booby, and laughing gulls. Some species use a variety of habitats as well. Go back to this. Like noddies will use, they can be seen in so many different habitats, but then least terns will only be seen in like open sandy areas, or sometimes they even nest on roofs of buildings, but definitely in open areas. So for this, as I mentioned, you can count from a distance using binoculars or a spotting scope, best with large species like boobies. You want to record where you're observing from. It's a lat long. And you're counting the number of nesting pairs, as I mentioned, but you can also count the number of juveniles if there's a creche. So a creche is when the juveniles all gather together, or not juveniles, sorry, the birds that are about to fledge will gather together. It could be juveniles as well, but it's good to use a clicker like that picture at the bottom, or have another person writing, because when you're scanning across a colony, you don't want to keep looking down because you might lose your spot. You want to be able to be consistent as you scan. And of course, this will not include cavity nests unless you happen to see a bird flying in. This, as I mentioned, the remote counts are less accurate, but there's also less disturbance. Counting from sea, you want to be close enough to count, but not to flush. Be aware of rocks near shore. You want to have someone navigating and then an observer and a recorder. So ideally, at least 3 people. You want calm seas. And if you don't have calm seas, you need a strong stomach, because looking through binoculars on a rocking boat is really hard. It also makes it harder to count, and you're not going to get as accurate a count. If the island is flat, you're not going to see much from a boat. So this is more where you have cliffs, because you probably couldn't get onto the cliff anyway, so you're counting it from the sea, like the picture on the right. And again, if there's cavities, shrubs, trees, you're probably not going to get a good count either. And rarely will you get nest contents. So this is less accurate, but sometimes it's all you can do. If you can get into the colony, you can walk through and count each nest. And if you are able to, you can actually mark the nest for repeat surveys. And you'll be able to assess whether you missed any nests on the first visit. But before you go through the colony, you want to look from a distance. because the birds could easily flush once you get in there, and then you have these mystery eggs and chicks. Like you come across this little guy on the left and like, you're not sure what species it is. And you can figure it out, like there's ID books, there's ways to figure it out, but it's a lot easier if you just see the bird leave the nest and know what it is. So you can mark each nest with a number. If you're gonna be going back for a long, like many years, you can use permanent markers like metal, spray painted rocks. But if you're just going out for the season, you can also use biodegradable markers like popsicle sticks and just put numbers on them. Again, we're counting nesting pairs. If there's time, you can record the nest contents, like whether there's eggs or chicks. And you can also record the crash of fledging birds. You can record courting that you see and any dead birds. Note how cryptic this bird is on the left. You need to be really careful when you're walking through colonies. Even experienced people can just be surprised suddenly that there's a bird right under their foot where they're about to step. So you want to walk carefully and slowly, but at the same time, of course, we want to limit the time in the colony. So it's a balancing act. Another type of nesting is in shrub or tall grass habitat. On the right, you can see it's like under a cactus, which is not a great place to have to survey, but you know, that's often part of what we're dealing with is really unfriendly plants. They're not always going to be on top of the shrubs or grasses. They could be under it or inside a clump, like this laughing gull in the middle. Some of the species you'll see also include brown boobies, sooty terns, bridled tern, and brown and black noddies. On that bridled tern, if you guys can even see in the very center of the photo, there's a little white dot, and that is the egg. So again, it takes a lot of being really aware and good eyes to see some of these nests. You can also rarely find roseate terns, frigate birds, red-billed tropic birds, and brown pelicans in shrubs and tall grass. It's not their more widespread habitat, but you know, they don't know the rules, so they could be in any of those places. So in order to count these areas, obviously you can't just look from a distance because it's less accurate. They're covered in bushes. But you can still mark nests, same methods as the open areas. You want to look deep into the vegetation, and sometimes you have to bash through bushes to get in there. Again, being careful not to be crushing anything, but like in this picture, there's a nest on top of the bush and under it. So it'd be multiple levels. If time is short, you can also do a flush count. This is a really rough estimate. This is kind of a last ditch effort sort of count. Like maybe there's a big storm coming in, you just got to the island, you're like, oh, it's such a waste, let's at least do this, you know, if you don't have time for a more accurate count. I mean, there could be situations where this is needed. Maybe you're concerned about impacting the colony. There's a predator nearby and you know, you don't want to risk having them come over and check out the birds, or access to the colony is limited. You still need to be aware of things like predators and heat. But the way it works is if one person approaches the colony and the other person records the number of birds in flight. You can also use photo and video if you want to count later. And a lot of places aren't going to have this information, but it's based on a ratio of birds in the air versus nests in the ground for each species. So if you know that if you see 20 birds in the air, it means that there's 15 nests, for example. You know, that's just making that up, but that's the idea. And even if you don't have that, this is at least something you can use for the future. If you go back at that same time of year, you can be like, oh, there's half as many birds in the air as last year. Like maybe there's a population decline here. Another type of nest is trees or arboreal. And these have their own methods. They're often on top of the trees or bushes. So some of the species you'll find in this type of habitat include frigate birds, red-footed boobies, brown pelicans, and brown and black noddies. So these, you often would count them from a distance. You know, imagine you're underneath a tree, it's hard to count through the vegetation. So if you have a good vantage point, you can count from above, preferably. Boobies and noddies are not going to flush as easily as frigate and pelicans typically. Again, like every site is different. And of course, it's difficult to mark nests that are in trees, but you can also segment it by each tree, or if it's a large bush, and maybe mark the tree and note, how many nests were in that one. Noddies can be really hard to see just because they're small and deep in, inside a tree. So just something to keep in mind. The last type of habitat is crevices or cavities. And this picture on the left is funny for me. We were surveying for tropic birds, and this researcher was looking in this hole and didn't see the tropic bird until it started screaming, and she started screaming. So it was rather dramatic. But sometimes birds help you out that way. They call, and there's no doubt that they're in there. Sometimes they're really hard to find. Some of the cavity nesting species in this region are Audubon shearwater, red-billed tropic bird, white-tailed tropic bird, and bridled terns. Black-capped petrels on Hispaniola, and they have been observed flying into other areas, but haven't been confirmed nesting. So we just encourage people to, if you hear something that you don't recognize, try to get a recording. We definitely want to get information like that. Audubon shearwater and black-capped petrels return at night, which makes them especially difficult to detect. You're not going to see them flying around during the day, bringing food to their chicks or something. Red-billed tropic birds are pretty noisy and active in the afternoons. Bridled terns can be in and out. White-tailed tropic birds, in my experience, nest on pretty steep cliffs, and that might vary by location too. So like here, we're rappelling down to check nests, and that's not going to be possible for a lot of people. So nesting, to look for these type of nests, of course, there's visual searches, like in the top picture, we're just looking under every rock, and it's really time consuming, and you can have huge areas to cover. So it can be needle in a haystack kind of thing. There are some things you can look for, like smell, and also on the visual search, also like guano, feathers. Even if you don't see a bird or a nest itself, you can see those kind of clues. Also sound, as I mentioned, if they're calling, and leaving audio recorders at the site can be helpful, especially for nocturnal species that are only going to be calling and returning when you're probably not there. And video scopes for kind of deeper crevices. You can get a video that's on the end of a tube that's flexible, and you kind of snake it into the hole until you get to the back, and you can see whether there's anything in there. So as I mentioned, some species come in at night, and we have special tools. These are all pretty high tech, but marine radar can detect birds flying, and we have what we call targets that move at a certain speed across the computer screen, and so you can determine possibly what species it is, or at least what type of bird. There's night vision goggles, which just allow you to see, somewhat grainy images, but sometimes depending on the quality, you can get pretty clear idea of what's coming in. And also thermal imaging. So this uses heat to detect animals. And so in the Caribbean, because it's so hot, you don't get much contrast during the day. So this often has to happen at night when it's cooler. And in this picture, they were able to detect noddies on nests. You could also use it for detecting non-native mammals like rats. So because you just have this hole in the ground, you don't necessarily know what's in it. Sometimes you have to use clues. So we've got 5 things we look for. And as some researchers have established, if you get 3 of these, you can say that it's apparently occupied. You're not saying it's definitely occupied, you're just saying it's apparently occupied. So smell, as I mentioned, is one of them. Some of these birds have a really distinct odor. You might see guano, bird footprints, scratch marks, or feathers. So you're looking for any combination of those. Tropic birds, they can sometimes nest, as I mentioned, in really steep areas, so you might not be able to even access where the nests are. So you could do aerial counts of individuals at a peak time, especially if you're short on the amount of time you have to survey and search nest sites. And if you have, like for example, in Bermuda, Wingate has over the years done aerial counts mixed with nest counts. And so he has an index. If I see this many birds in the sky, I know there's this many nests, sort of thing. It gives you a general idea of how the population's doing without having to search every crevice. And again, that will vary by season and location, and as will these times possibly. I mean, this is just something that was seen in the Lesser Antilles. It's something the Lowrys used when they created the Seabird Atlas for the Lesser Antilles. So because they were limited on time, they were surveying every island within a year. Every island in the Lesser Antilles within a year, they didn't have time to search every crevice. So for white-tailed tropic birds, they found that the peak time that they'd be flying around was between 8:30 and 10 in the morning. And for red-billed tropic birds, they'd be flying around between 3 and 4:30 in the afternoon. And so they would take those counts and use that as their indicator for the population. And they were not getting nesting pairs from that. They were just getting individuals. If you do have huge colonies, more than 500, you may want to do plots. So ideally, these are randomized, because what we tend to do is we go, oh, there's a nice open area, let's survey there. But what you really want to do is get unbiased plots. So and it describes how to do this in the manual, but you would randomize your locations for plots. And you may need to also segment it by habitat type, because you'll have bushes in one area and grass in another, and they're going to have different types of birds in them and possibly different densities. So for a circular plot, you just mark the center point, which is like the observer, the perspective of where the camera is in this photo. And that person's holding one end of the string, and then I'm walking around the outside with the other end of it, and it's a certain radius. And this also is in the manual based on the species, and you can base it on several factors, but you're counting everything inside that circle. So you just walk in the circle, and you may have to walk in and out to be able to see like around bushes and stuff. And then once you have, the sufficient number of those plots, you can extrapolate for the colony area, which you're going to need to figure out. You have to figure out what is the boundary of the colony. And all squares are also an option for this. It doesn't have to be a circle. And again, I said there's like more detail in the manual. We're not going to go too into that here, but it is one way to do this. Line transects are another option. Sometimes it's difficult to avoid bias in this, because when you're walking, you avoid steep areas or maybe like a big group of cactus. But it can also be used when a circle or square isn't feasible, like in a narrow ravine. All right, so it's time for the quiz, which we're not going to test you on, like you're not going to get graded, but we thought it'd be fun just to see, if, I guess if this is working. And the first question is, what method would you use to census these frigate birds? A is circular plot, B, remote or distance, C, walk through the colony and count each nest, and D, none of the above. So Lisa, I guess you can launch. There you go. There's your poll. So if everyone could please choose your answer. We'll give it a little bit of time and come back. You guys can see what answer is being chosen, and we're doing really well so far. You guys are awesome.
Yes, and if you're watching from Facebook, go ahead and put your answer in on Facebook. I know that I don't think you can see the poll, the Zoom poll on Facebook. So go ahead and put your answer on Facebook. We're monitoring that as well.
And if you've already put in your answer, feel free to go ahead and type your introduction into the Q&A. We are seeing a few questions in that stream, which we will get to. Thank you.
Yeah, and apologies that the chat is not working. I've gone into Zoom help and everything, and according to Zoom, our settings are right, but it's just not working for some reason. So continue to use the Q&A, and you can also use the Facebook chat if you're watching on Facebook.
Okay, well, we're at 66%. I guess, is that good enough, you think? Kind of been around that for a while. So the answer here is remote or distance, which is 90%. So great to see that that was clear for a lot of people. A circular plot would be difficult here because you'd be under the tree probably having to use your string to walk around in a circle. So share the results. All right. Ready to move on? Next question. All right. From a distance, you estimate there are at least 1,000 city turns flying over this easily accessible site. What method would you use to count? A, circular plots. B, line transects. C, walk through the colony and count each nest. Or D, none of the above.
Yeah, go ahead and get your answers in. Don't worry, it's not being graded.
We don't know who you are. It's all anonymous.
Take your best guess. Natalia will review we'll share the results of the poll, and then Natalia will also review the answer. Okay, we've got 50% of people participated. We'll give you another 10, 20 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Here are the results of how people answered. How'd they do, Natalia?
Great. So yeah, circular plot is the answer. Because we have more than 500 birds, it's going to be a lot to, more than 500 pairs, probably it's going to be a lot to count. I mean, you could do a walk through the colony if you had enough people, but you also want to limit the amount of time you're out there. So something to consider. Line transects could be a possibility as well. But circular plots for this type of habitat would probably be the best. Okay, our next question is this. A herd of goats sees you and begins to run away toward a mix of low grass and bushes where birds are nesting. What do you do? A, wait until they are through the colony, then begin your count. B, find a spot to do a remote count. C, leave the island immediately. Or D, none of the above. And you can also, I think, move the poll around your screen if you want to see photos while you're answering. We weren't able to include the photos in the actual poll.
You're doing great. Keep those answers coming in. We'll give you another 10 seconds or so.
All right, got great participation on this one. All right.
Excellent. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here's the results.
All right, so the answer I chose was B, find a spot to do a remote count. Just because our first rule is do no harm and goats can run through and trample nests. Counting birds is not as important as the safety of them. But this can also be a hard decision to make. If you have put a lot of effort into getting out to the site and you're like, oh, we just need to do the survey, you know, it can be hard to let that go. But if you can, like finding a spot to step back, have the goats not be running through the colony is going to be safer for the birds. But again, you're going to have to decide. You have to decide based on each situation.
I have to just really quick and say that we have one respondent who says what he would do is start a goat removal process.
I like it.
Conservationist.
I actually thought about that as a joke. I was like, run them off a cliff. No, but that's too morbid. No, and that's definitely something we want to work towards is removing non-native species. So yes, I agree. Okay, so moving on to data. This is describing what you find. This is the ultimate thing that we're going to get from you from the census is your data. So it's really important that it's quality, that it's standardized. And this is a form that Birds Caribbean's developed. It's a site description form. So it just gives us a really good idea of where are you working. And it's something you might complete on your reconnaissance or your first survey. We plan to provide a standardized form for participants in the 2023 census, but I wanted to give you an idea of some of the options. And this is also available on the website for Birds Caribbean. So when you're on the field, you're going to describe what you find. And if you're doing nest contents or status, this is some of the codes you could use. Now, not everyone uses the same codes. This is an example of what you could do. Ideally, you would have this with you when you're in the field to refer to. If you're using a notebook, I would like tape it to the inside of the notebook. Just have it with you. And it includes things like the feathering of a chick. So you might have a chick who just hatched and is still kind of wet. You might have small downy chicks that are they have some feathers, they're partially feathered, but they also have a lot of down. Or you might have a fully feathered chick that's almost entirely feathered and has a little bit of down left. Or, one that's ready to fledge. So there's also information on the type of cavity you find, like we mentioned, possibly occupied nests. It could be occupied, like you actually see the bird, unknown. And so lots of different options there, just getting good detail about what you're seeing. So we have another little quiz here for you. What would you record for this laughing gull nest? A is 1 egg and 1 newly hatched chick. B is 2 eggs. C is 1 egg and 1 downy chick. Or D, none of the above. So please enter your answer in the poll. And again, you should be able to move that poll screen around so you can see the photo if you want to refer to it while you're answering. Give everyone a little bit more time. We're up to about half of our participants now. Again, it's anonymous. No one's going to see your answer related to you. Okay.
About 10 more seconds. Bum, 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 bum,
I can hear
bum,
music.
bum, 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 da, 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 da. All right, that's probably enough time.
Yeah, I think we're at
5 more
7.
seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, how'd they do?
Okay, so again, most people got it correct. This is an egg and also a newly hatched chick. So you can see the birds still like half in the shell. Hopefully that's visible. Maybe it's not that great a picture, but it's still wet, which indicates that it hasn't had time to dry out. It just came out of the egg. So the answer is A, 1 egg and 1 newly hatched chick. All right.
Natalia, I have a question about that.
Oh, you're breaking up, Jen, but try again.
Only because I forgot to ask it earlier, but since this chick is about to be downy, it will only take a few hours to dry. So is it biologically meaningful to distinguish?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's just that we're providing the answer to we're providing an accurate assessment of what we see, So it's not a downy chick. So we wouldn't write that, I guess. Is the thing.
Right, yeah, you can see it's still hatching. So it gives you information on the synchrony of the hatching between the two eggs.
Yeah, because you could come back the next week and that, I don't know, sometimes you have eggs that are dead and don't hatch. Or if you come back and that chick's gone, I don't know, it's just more information about the actual, like what you observed.
And more information is always better, even if you don't use it in the end.
Yeah.
Which brings me to a question brought in on the Q&A stream to recording observations versus what you infer. There was the question is, and perhaps what if you found an empty nest? Maybe it isn't active, it was active 3 months ago. So again, what's the gold standard? And then what are the backups when you don't know? And is it critically important to make sure you're differentiating between your observations and then what you infer from them?
So I think it's difficult to answer generally because each situation is going to vary. Like especially for cavities, there's a lot of inference because you can't always see what's in them. For most nests, you're just going to mark what you see. Like there is something for a nest that's empty. Like that's a code you could use. So I think it's purely just observational, like what you're seeing most times. Okay, so our next question.
And you have a,
Go ahead.
I'm
You're
sorry.
breaking up, Jen.
And in the Q&A stream, you felt, oh, sorry. And did you want to add to that? In the Q&A stream, you had I believe, a comment about nests. And muted.
Sorry,
We'll
I
come back to it.
I don't really have anything to add right now.
Okay, so let's move on to our next question, which is, what would you record for this laughing gull observation? A downy chick, B, a partially feathered chick, C, a fully feathered chick, or D, a juvenile?
This one's a little challenging.
It is challenging, yeah. But it's true. I mean, there's so much variation.
Yeah.
When you're in the
So
field,
look-
things are not always clear. So
Right, yeah. Look closely.
and sometimes you don't have that much time to really contemplate each observation either. You're trying to move.
Mhm. Yeah,
And you know, you're not going to get everything right every time. We're really trying to get as accurate as we can. And the nature of field work is it's not always 100%.
hmm
I guess it's important to be consistent with yourself if you're
exactly.
not clear about the definitions, to be consistent.
And then write a description of what you see
Yeah.
too. You're calling this and take a picture and
Mhm.
yeah.
All right, I think we can end the poll.
Okay.
So it's very reasonable. Most people thought this was a juvenile. I would consider this a fully feathered chick because if you look at the nape of the neck, they're still down there. So this bird is probably not out foraging and flying on its own, like feeding, you know, it's still getting fed by its parents. So that's what I would call this. So that's the answer. Just looking for that little bit of down. The nape's usually the last spot that they have that downy feathering because they can't reach it with their bill to pull it off. And so it's often the last bit.
Great. And Natalia, Jennifer asks, NC and MU are the same on this sheet. Is that supposed to be that way? Do you want to go back to your sheet?
You mean the nest content sheet?
I guess, yes.
So that was just taken from the Seabird manual. That's not something I've used before. So sorry, I can't speak specifically to that. Maybe Anne, if you have something to say about that.
Yeah, I'd have to look back at the sheet.
Okay, I can head back to it.
They're saying that which one?
And, oh, that's true, isn't it? Huh? NC, next complete, but not apparently active. NU, next complete, but not apparently active. That's definitely a typo or something.
Okay.
Thank you
Yeah.
thank you for
Yeah.
seeing that, and we will fix it.
Yeah, we'd missed that one.
Yeah, I mean, we adapted it from Berger and Lawrence, so who knows? It could just be a typo, but thank you for
Yeah.
flagging that. We will go back and figure it out. Correct it in the manual.
And I think this is our last question. This cavity narrows and turns, so you cannot see the end. You do see guano, like at the entrance there, feathers, and there's a strong smell. How would you describe this observation? A, an empty cavity. B, cavity occupied. C, cavity possibly occupied. Or D, cavity contents unknown. So here's your poll. Just enter your answer.
Think back to Natalia's tips on how you tell if a cavity is active or not.
We're at about 60% participation. We'll give you guys a few more seconds.
Good quiz question.
These are hard.
Yeah.
The cavities are definitely the challenging one. And a lot of it's just a judgment call sometimes, like, do you think there's a bird or not? Or do you think do you think something's been in there recently? Does it seem like it's not been active?
Yep.
Hard to be really like tactical about that.
Yep. Definitely being a detective here.
Right. A couple more seconds. And the poll. All right, and so here's our results. And I had this as cavity possibly occupied, because if we're using the standard of having 3 of those 5 possibilities, this had that. It had the guano, the feathers, and the smell. Again, you're gonna have to do some judgment calls when you're there. That's what we had the answer for in this one.
Yeah. Great job, everybody.
Yeah, well done. Okay. Again, we're moving back to our data sheets here. So when you're on land, of course, you get more information. And so this data sheet, again, from Birds Caribbean, you can provide the contents of each nest and get some real good details about timing of nesting, you know, what the peaks are, that kind of thing. In the Grenadines, we have a lot of citizen scientists, and we don't always want people going onto colonies. Some of them may not be accessible, like I said, because of the shoreline being so rough. So we have a boat-based survey form, and this one's pretty simple. It's pretty basic, and we include the photos of the birds because not everyone has great ID skills. We even had a category for sooty versus bridle terns, those bottom 2, because they can be hard to separate. That was gone into quite a bit in the first identification webinar, was separating those. So it's a great thing to review before you go out in the field. We can laminate these and use a wet erase marker, and then the citizen scientist can just take a picture of it and send it to the head researcher, and then reuse the form. So it just makes it easy as far as resources for people to have something reusable. There's also a form we have from land, again, for citizen scientists. So we have the photos, but it's got more detail, like the eggs and chicks and things like that you'd be able to see when you're on land that are hard to see from a boat or from far away. Or you can just use your own notebook. Waterproof notebooks are important to have, something like a Write in the Rain brand. You want to use pencil or something waterproof. You don't want your notes getting washed out. Make sure it's legible. When you're, writing, holding the notebook in the wind, it can be a little crazy, and just make sure that what you're writing you can read later on, because it's a lot of work. You want to make sure you can use the data you collected. and still covering all the aspects. So I like to put columns, like pre-create my notebook columns. So I know I'm going to count all the aspects that need to be covered. And as I mentioned before, consistent coding. So putting the codes in your notebook right at the front so it's easy to check, and make sure you're using consistent coding throughout. One issue in all research is bias. So we want to standardize as much as possible. So you want to have, if you can, the same observers doing the count, similar weather, the time of day, the area you're covering, and how long you were there. It is field work. Things aren't perfect, but we can strive to, have these certain standards, and using the same methods when you can. So if you did circular plots the first time, it's better to do that than to try and do a line transect, just so you can compare, unless there's a really good reason to change it. Maybe it was ineffective or something, but, and you also want to have no major differences in the abilities of observers working on the same project. You might have someone who's really skilled at identifying sooty turns and bridle turns, and the other person maybe couldn't, and so they just lumped them together. So you want to have similar abilities between people. So detection probability is another way of saying, did you count all the birds? Because chances are we're going to miss some. And there's ways for assessing how good your detection ability was. One is double observer. So you have two different observers count and you compare the results. Repeated counts, you repeat within a few days because it's probably not going to change that much. So you come back and see how different it is from your previous count. Removal counts is about dividing your counts into time intervals and comparing how many new birds are seen. So if you spend 10 minutes searching and then you do it again, are you finding new birds on your second count? Distance sampling. This just means that the farther you are away, the harder it is to find birds. And so this is another way of accounting for that detection probability. So each of these results in a factor. So for example, if you find 10 birds on your first search and 20 birds in total after repeated searches, you can multiply your future initial counts by 2. That's just a really basic example. It's just giving you kind of an index for how well you're doing at detecting birds. And in the end, hopefully having a more accurate count. Again, like this picture shows, you can have really cryptic birds that are hard to spot, and maybe you need to do a few surveys before you find them all. There's also observer error rate. Some people are really optimistic and positive, and they think there's way more birds than someone else, and it's difficult sometimes in the field to know which is correct, and maybe neither are. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle. So it's something to keep in mind, and that there's different skill levels, as I mentioned. Like some people may have really good sense of smell and they'll find birds in cavities, and other people might be better at IDing certain birds. So that's another issue that can happen. So as I mentioned, there are many ways to observe birds, and future webinars are going to talk about some of the other technology you can use. Like I mentioned, the acoustics, leaving sound recorders out to see what kind of birds you're finding in the area. We also will talk about drones in a future webinar, which is a great way to get counts from the air, especially if you don't have a good observation point. And we'll also be talking about data recording and management, because we just gave an introduction here, but it's really could be its own topic for sure. And as well as Caribbean seabird breeding ecology, and also documenting threats. So some more methods for assessing threats, and possibly also conservation actions that can be taken, which would be a goal of the census. So I think that's it for me. Thank you everybody for being here and your questions thus far. I think we can continue to take questions here. We should have time, I think. And I want to thank Lisa for your help with the poll, and Jen for moderating, and our panelists as well, and for jumping in. And yeah, thanks.
So Natalia, Paulo had asked in the chat He said, for terns, for example, if we count the number of nests, would it be safe to say that this is the number of pairs? That was his question.
Yes, I mean, I do. I equate nests to pairs. So if you have 10 nests, you have 10 pairs. I think that's a safe assumption.
So long as they're active nests, because you could, rather than last year's nest. And that's where it gets clever.
Yeah, and that's also where repeated surveys help, right? Because you're like, you know, there could be a bird that built the nest and they're just in the courtship phase while everyone else is already laying eggs. And so you need to go back and see if that nest is actually active.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the clever bit. And as far as I know, nobody's really worked out a good formula for saying, I mean, for saying how many nests, total nests, you count X number of nests, how many pairs there are. All you can say is that you know that on that date, there weren't less than the number you counted.
And also one thing I didn't mention is birds can relay. So if they lost their egg, they can relay it, or even their chick, if it's early enough in the season, they can relay an egg. And so they could be totally out of sync with everyone else in the colony because of that. And so you might find a new nest, like a nest that's empty in the middle of the season, and then the next week it could have an egg, even though everyone else has chicks already. So something to keep in mind.
Thank you so much, Natalia, and everyone else. We do have some time for questions. The official formal presentation period has ended, but we'd love to stay on for a little while. If you have questions, you can write them into the Q&A, or I believe you could just raise your hand and we can unmute you and have you ask your question. So please feel free to type or ask virtually and we can discuss more.
And I see that Jane from Cayman also offered to provide some methods. So yeah, I think this is definitely a sharing situation. I think there's so much experience that needs to be shared to really expand our knowledge and find out what works. So it's a learning process for sure.
Anthony would ask that you go back to the first slide again so he can take a picture.
Okay.
That's an easy question to answer.
Yeah, I think I can do that. First, I have to share my screen. Okay. There you go, Anthony. Enjoy. Get Jen in there too, do a screenshot. Well, it seems like we don't have any questions. It was so clear and everyone understood everything I said, which is great.
If we don't have any questions, I'd love to hear from people, like if they're planning to do seabird surveys for next year.
Or to know what your biggest obstacle is as you plan those surveys. Obviously,
well, that's a good point. Yeah.
Talked a lot about funding and access, but I guess in terms of technical questions, here's our chance to relate it to the presentation we just saw. I had a question. If partners have already been doing seabird surveys, would we like to have a look at their data sheets? I think that would be helpful to contrast and compare if we're going to come up with a sort of a generic recommended one. I think that would be useful for our working group.
Yeah. Especially as we develop this next webinar on data management, I think getting input from people about what's working for them is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you're still on the line, just drop one of us a note and say, here's what my data sheet looks like. I think it's great. Or here's my data sheet. We've always struggled with this particular part in terms of making it consistent with others, et cetera, et cetera. So just love to hear from you all.
I could put, I guess we can't do chat. I don't know. I guess it's not working. So I could put my email in there if anyone wants to send me what they have for data sheets.
Anthony just asked, are we recommending eBird for the 2023 census? And I will say that right now we are in conversation with Jeff Gerbrack and others at Cornell to make eBird more appropriate for colony counts. So Anthony, I think we're gonna hold off answering that question in specific until we have a few more conversations.
Yeah, one of our limiting issues is that it's hard to record nest contents in that kind of format. We could definitely get counts, but if we're getting more detailed information, we may need something more specific to the task. But it doesn't mean that we can't share the data afterwards also. And we could upload it to eBird. You know, we've done this for, like, for example, OBIS CMAP is like an ocean biogeographic platform. It's open source data. And so we took the Seabird Atlas information that was in the book and just put it onto this open source platform where you can see it mapped out. And so just because we put it in one format doesn't mean it can't be in others. And I think eBird is a great resource that especially for the meta-analysis that kind of happened through that platform, I think it's really important that we contribute there. Lisa, I see you just put a link to the Seabird resources. That's a great idea. It's a great thing for people to check out. And that, like I said, you can download the manual there and a lot of other things that are going to help you in your process. So check it out. All right, well, if there's nothing else, I think we could wrap up. Thank you all so much for being here. I put my email in the chat. So, you know, like we mentioned, you want to send your data sheets to us, give us an example of what's working for you. We'll try to integrate that into the final Seabird census form that we're hoping to develop, and also into the future data management webinar. So please keep an eye out for those. Definitely, if you're not on the Seabird Working Group listserv, join that, which I think you can also do through that resources page. And that's a great way to stay in touch with what's happening. Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Natalia.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
you.
Natalia.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Ann and Hannah.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Yes,
Bye.
good job. All right, everybody, until the next webinar, we'll see you.
Happy
Bye.
seabirding.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.